Well, thanks everybody for being here this afternoon. My name is Daryl Christensen, and I'm with Ability 360, and we're here today to talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this presentation is co-sponsored from the Arizona Center for Disability Law, the Statewide Independent Living Council, and DIRECT, also down in Tucson. DIRECT is a Center for Independent Living as well. Today's presentation is titled Americans with Disabilities Act, Compliance and Your Business. And we'll cover Title III, which is the public accommodations portion of the law. Today we'll cover 4 points. One is why making sure that your business is accessible, why that's good business sense for you. Secondly, how the ADA applies to your business. Third, the steps that you can take to ensure that your business is accessible and complies with the full ADA. And then lastly, you'll have community resources that can help you along the way toward compliance. So those are the objectives that we have for today. The ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, is a 26-year-old federal law. And it helps to protect people with disabilities. Some folks are surprised to know that the law covers 1 in 5 Americans, or nationally, 57 million Americans are covered under this law. We're going to talk about much more than just parking lots. Parking lots have certainly been in the news lately, but we're going to talk much more than that as the law complies or applies to your full business. We have 2 speakers today with us. Very fortunate to have Esen Otu, Senior Director in the Diversity and Community Affairs with Mountain Park Health Center. We also have Sarah Cater, Staff Attorney with the Arizona Center for Disability Law. So with that as our backdrop and introduction, just want to thank you again for coming and participating, and introduce Esen Otu from Mountain Park Health Center.
Thank you. Thank you. So happy to be here. Happy to share a little bit of experience that we have at Mountain Park Health Center in relation to the ADA, but also universal design, and really why it's important to businesses and organizations to take the time to be thoughtful about inclusivity and specifically inclusion of individuals with disabilities. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, if you will, about a facility that we opened in January of 2015 and how we really did a lot of this, and also why it was important to us as an organization and as a business. And so Mountain Park Health Center has been around for over 35 years. We serve about 75,000 patients throughout the valley. And as you can imagine, folks from all walks of life. We're located in medically underserved areas, and so that many times translates to a lot of other social determinants and barriers that our patients face. So we try to really think about how we're going to address those barriers and determinants. And so I want to tell you a little bit about this particular project and how the ADA universal design and accessibility showed up for us, and why we focused our time and effort on that. So this is a picture, this is a before picture of our Gateway Clinic, 3838 East Van Buren. It's a pretty ugly building at this point. This is about February, I think, of 2013, before we purchased the facility. We like to do adaptive reuse, or like to find ugly buildings and make them beautiful and into community assets. So that's what we did here. This was the old Ramada Inn Corporation and headquarters, call center, all sorts of fun stuff before it was vacant for years. And so what did we do to really take this facility and turn it into a community benefit? Well, we had some project goals. We wanted to create greater visibility and provide greater access to care in the Gateway community. We wanted to continue to redefine the community health center, what a community health center does and is. We wanted to create a visual expression of health, and you'll see what that looks like as I go through these slides, and also create a welcoming, accessible, and inclusive medical home for the community. That was really important to us. And in my role as Diversity and Community Affairs Director, I get the fun job of figuring out how we do that. how we create welcoming, inclusive, and accessible environments. So we really started with engaging stakeholders. We engaged a small group of stakeholders. We worked with the ASU School of Sustainability. We worked with the City of Phoenix. We worked with a local architect as a partner to really understand the area, what some of the needs and challenges were. And then we went a few steps further. We began doing community visioning workshops that went over a course of a summer. So about 3 months that we spent engaging lots of different stakeholders in the community. So from our Somali refugee community to our staff to patients. And they really helped us understand and prioritize what the community needs were and what people wanted to see on the site within the clinic and how it would connect with the community. And so we went through lots of different workshops, even things like walking audits. One of the things that we did specific to individuals with disabilities was really invited and connected with Arizona Statewide Independent Living Council to help us think about the equipment that we purchased, right? And so this is a photograph of one of our great volunteers that helped us demo exam tables and figure out how difficult or easy is it to transfer from your wheelchair to these particular exam tables that we had demoed over the course of several days. And so this really gave us an opportunity to incorporate and to create other places where feedback could be drawn upon and we could make better decisions as an organization, right? Purchase equipment that works for everybody. And so that's what we were able to do with these partnerships. Ability 360 was a huge partner. We came and toured the facility here prior to really doing much design at all on the facility. We wanted to figure out how could we incorporate some of the really interesting and important design elements of Ability 360's facility to make sure it was accessible and universally accessible. And so Ability 360 was a great partner in really helping us think through what our design would eventually look like. And so this is the Mountain Park Health Center facility from across the street at Van Buren here. Here's another picture. I think it's a nighttime or either a dawn or dusk picture here. You'll notice a few things, even on the exterior ramps which lead up both ways. Another thing that you'll notice as you walk inside are things like the placement of windows. And so this is a west-facing window that allows you to see towards downtown, but it's at lots of different vantage points. So we thought about folks from lots of different spectrums, from young people, so the little ones being able to actually look out at the playground that we have outside longingly until their appointment's over and they can play, to folks at whatever vantage point that they were looking out into the site at, being able to actually see out. And so small design cue, but very universal piece. Things like the check-in stations and thinking about how our patients would come up to those check-in stations, how they would be oriented. The height of those countertops were important to us, and also the height of the countertops for our staff working on the other side, right? And so not creating a physical barrier there was important. Things like seating and how we selected furniture was really important and really came from a lot of different elements of feedback there, and also how people were able to navigate through the entire building, an entire clinic. So one of the things that you'll see, and I think that's different if you had to compare it to previous facilities where we didn't go through this process, is that we have things like much more wider hallways, right? We noticed in other facilities the hallways were very narrow, and so a lot of times, unfortunately, our patients with disabilities had difficulty navigating easily through those facilities. And we didn't want to create that sort of barrier anymore. So you see things like wider hallways here and here. If you look at our exam rooms, they're about 20% larger than your average exam room. And so we did that for a multitude of reasons. One, was that we wanted to make sure, again, the navigation in an exam room would be fluid and wouldn't be constricted, right? So again, thinking about how individuals with mobility issues might navigate through that exam room, and also larger families that we typically see, and extended families that come into the clinics. So if you had 3, 4, 5 family members coming with you to your appointment, we'd want you to be able to get all in the exam room and seated comfortably. And so that was a design feature. Other things like wider doorways and entryways really were things that we thought about. Automatic door openers. I give an example that I'm not proud of, but it's one I have to share because it's a lesson learned. So we had a patient at our Tempe facility who sat on what we call our diversity site community stakeholders that we invite in every quarter to have dialogue and conversation about what's happening within the clinic facility and what's happening outside. And so this particular patient was individual with disability that was a wheelchair user, and he said, I have issues actually physically getting into the clinic. You guys don't have an automatic door opener on your front door. And it was such a glaring mistake and miss for us that we were luckily able to hear him voice this concern and tell us that there was a physical barrier there in which we were able to act on and actually install an automatic door opener on that door. But we'd never invited our stakeholders in to find out. We never would have really learned that we had created a barrier for not just this patient, but other patients. And so we've really tried to think about that since, and this was several years ago, and incorporate these different elements into our spaces. As you sort of go into the back of the house at the Gateway facility, you see some different workstations, right? And so you'll see this, it's a multi-level, multi-height workstation. So this again was done for several reasons, but I think it's another universal design element that no matter, again, what vantage point that you're at, you can have a nice work surface and station to work at. And it also promotes collaboration. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to kind of create a 4 or more person workstation here that you see back here. And you also see a lot of space, I think, to move throughout, which I think is important, and it's another sort of ongoing theme of this facility that we heard from all of our stakeholders is sort of creating those spaces. So why did we really do this? Why did we spend the time and resources to invest in a process that incorporated these design elements, right? That thought about ADA and maybe pushed it a bit further, thought about universal design and incorporated those things. Well, one, we think we just got a better result at the end. I can tell you that the feedback that we get from our patients, our employees, our community partners is that this is a great facility. People love the feel of it. People love how they're able to navigate through it. We just think it's a better end result and a better designed facility. We're able to really ramp up faster. I think the more you engage partners and community in design of a facility like this, you're able to open your doors and actually folks come. They know it was coming and they were ready for it when it opened. And so we were able to ramp up quicker than we usually do. And we're able to leverage a lot of resources, right? So by utilizing partners like Ability 360, AZ Silk, we're able to really leverage the resources, be it volunteers or expertise, to help us, again, design a better facility. And then just creating trust and embeddedness in the community. We want folks to think about Mountain Park as a trusted member of the community. We want people to trust the care that we provide, trust the thought that we put into designing our facilities and into welcoming environments. And we wanted to be more embedded in the community. And I think as a result of doing all of these things, we were able to achieve that. So thank you for allowing me to share about our Gateway Clinic and our ADA and universal design elements. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for having me. My name is Sarah Cater. I'm an attorney at the Arizona Center for Disability Law. The center is a nonprofit law firm, so we represent people with disabilities who have a legal issue relating to their disability. Our services are free, and we really span the gamut of what issue you might have. Could be an employment issue, healthcare, mental health care, housing, voting, all sorts, special education, all sorts of things. So this is an important topic to us because we do get calls from people with disabilities who may have trouble accessing a business, and that, as we'll go through today, can be at various points. Could be at the parking lot, which we know is a hot topic, could be at the entrance of the business, inside the business, accessing the services. So this is a really important issue to us, and we think a big piece of this whole story is that businesses need to know and understand what their rights and obligations are. And when businesses have that information, they can better serve their clients. And as we know, and as Daryl alluded to, disability is not something that one is unlikely to encounter. It's a common thing in the United States, and it's something that we should embrace and help people access this community and society just like everyone else. So, the Americans with Disabilities Act is the big civil rights law that deals with people with disabilities, has been in existence since 1990. So that's something we definitely want to hit home, that it's been around for a long time, and whether or not you know of it, that's another issue, but it is in existence. It has been for decades. And so we really want to get the word out about what it is, what it means, and what you can do to make sure that your business is compliant. So a big piece of this is who is a qualified individual with a disability under the ADA. So disability means a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. To be protected by the ADA, a person must be able to prove he or she is a qualified individual with a disability, and they also have to be qualified for participation in the place of public accommodation. So that means if you're a business and you're offering a program, they need to be eligible for that program apart from their disability. And if they're not, then that's not going to be someone that's going to be wanting to participate in that program that you're giving to the community. So who is covered by Title III of the ADA? So Title III is the part of the ADA that deals with public accommodations. And the people who are covered are individual disability, an actual disability, history of a substantially limiting impairment, or regarded as having one. So that can be kind of confusing sometimes for people. Sometimes people don't actually have a disability but are regarded as having one, or they may have a history of having a disability, and those people are covered as well. So Title III applies to places of public accommodations, commercial facilities, and private entities that offer examinations or courses related to applications, licensing, certification, or credentialing for secondary or post-secondary education, professional, or trade purposes. So what is a public accommodation? It's a private entity that owns, leases to, or operates a place of public accommodation. So even though the business may be owned privately, if you open your business to the public, you're a place of public accommodation, and that means you have to be accessible. Here are some examples of places of public accommodation. It's really quite broad, and so that's what we want to, certainly like restaurants are going to be places of public accommodations, movie theaters, there's a lot of places of public accommodations listed here to give you some examples. You might wonder what's exempt under coverage. So exempt under coverage of Title III are private clubs, private homes, mixed-use residential facilities, and religious entities. Something that can be confusing for people is some people have heard that there are different standards that have applied in the history of the ADA and are wondering, well, if I was a building built before this date, what applies to me and what do I have to do? Basically, it's generally true that if you are a place of public accommodation, you have to be accessible. There are two sort of sets of standards based on when your building was built. There's the 1991 standards and the 2010 standards. And if you have questions about which standards may apply to you and what you can do to be compliant, we are going at the end going to give some information of places you can call to get that information. But essentially, if your building was built or altered before March 15th of 2012, then you're complying with the earlier standards. If it was built after that date, you're complying with the later standards. You still have to comply, and I think a big important thing to know is if you're making any alterations now, which is going to be in 2016, those have to comply with the new standards. So also at the end of the presentation, I give a link because I will go through some specific standards that do apply, but there are so very many, there really are quite a lot, and they are very specific. And so I give a link where you can go and find those actual standards and to see if your business complies, and if not, to help you come into compliance. People do sometimes also ask about historic buildings. Generally, you have to be compliant with the ADA unless it would threaten or destroy the historic significance of the building or facility. So that's kind of how it works with historic buildings. Usually there's a way to make the alteration that's going to not destroy the historic nature of the building. Prohibited actions under Title III. Here are some examples. Failure to design new facilities to provide accessibility to persons with disabilities. Failure to remove physical barriers that are easily removed. Refusal to make reasonable modifications in policies, practices, and procedures. Refusal to provide auxiliary aids necessary for people with disabilities that would not be too expensive or would not alter the service. Providing unequal services, providing segregated services. Refusing to allow a person with a disability to choose an integrated service. Requiring with people with disabilities to unnecessarily identify that they have a disability, and imposition of criteria that screens or tends to screen out people with disabilities. Obviously, universal design is something that we all hope people would put into play into their business, but these are sort of some of the bare minimums. These are prohibited actions. There are limits to your duty to provide access, and these are some of the legal definitions of those limits. So you don't have to take actions that constitute a fundamental alteration, and you may deny access if a person presents a direct threat to the health or safety of others. These obviously often aren't going to occur in your business, and there have been lots of litigation about what does it mean to be a fundamental alteration or a direct threat. Another question that's commonly asked is the issue of leased versus owned. So you might have an individual or an entity own a particular building, and then you have an organization that might lease that space. And where does the responsibility lie? The law isn't completely clear on that, but basically both probably have some kind of responsibility. The easiest way to explain it is usually if someone owns the building, they're going to be responsible for the things that, like the parking lot area, the entrance, things that the leased individual may not actually have control over. Like if they wanted to change part of that, they'd have to get permission from the owner. So say someone owns a building and Verizon leases the inside of it. The owner of the building would need to make sure that the parking lot was accessible and the entrance doors were accessible. But if Verizon's inside selling phones, they would have to make sure that the inside area that they're in control of while they're leasing it is accessible, and that someone coming in to try and buy a phone would be able to access those services inside of the building. So the next piece I'm going to go through is some barrier removal priorities. There's four main ones I'm going to talk about: the entrance, goods and services, restrooms, and amenities provided to the public. So essentially, the first thing you want to do is make sure that the entrance is accessible. From the car to public transportation, route to the door. So these are sort of checkpoints of things you want to look. So if you're looking at your business and trying to determine, okay, where are the points that I need to make sure are accessible, these are the things that you're going to want to look to. The entrance. And obviously, different types of disabilities are going to require different things, and so that's why these guidelines, where I provide the checklist towards the end of the presentation, give specific things to ensure that your business can be accessible to all different types of people with different types of disabilities. A ramp is a big one, so if you have stairs in the entrance of your business, you're going to need to make sure that there's some kind of ramp so that people can enter your building. The service entrance that might be in the back where deliveries are made is really not an appropriate option unless it's the only option, because putting in a ramp is not possible. But if it is possible, you would want to do that instead of requiring people to go to the service entrance. If the entrance that the public would typically use is not accessible, you definitely want to make sure you have a sign that shows where the accessible entrance is. That's a big problem because there may be an accessible entrance, but if people don't know where it is, they're not going to know to go there. So it's really not very useful if you don't have a sign directing people to where that entrance is. And something that I like to emphasize about a lot of these things is a lot of these things can be really common sense. Some of the int requirements may not be commonsensical. You may need to look them up and make sure and take your tape measure and make sure that everything's measuring correctly. But like putting a sign to the accessible entrance, that's just obvious, right? I mean, that would be something that anybody who's looking for a particular entrance, when you're looking for the entrance to a business, if you can't find it, a sign would be helpful. So put up a sign. Path of travel, no stairs, firm and slip-resistant path. 36 inches wide is generally the requirement. Curb cuts are really important, and protruding objects detectable by a cane. So I'm just giving some big things to check off. Obviously, there's really hundreds of things that you need to look for. And again, that checklist is your friend that I've provided at the end. Accessible parking and drop-off areas. A lot of times people do ask, well, how many accessible spots do I need? And it's based on the number of total spaces that you have. And in the checklist that I provide, it gives information on if you have this many of spaces total, then this is the number of accessible spaces you need to have. Van accessible spaces are really important also. Has to be 1 of every 6 accessible spaces that you have. People often don't understand, well, if I have accessible spots, why do I need to have van accessible spots also? They're really different. The van accessible spots provide extra space so that someone with a ramp can exit their vehicle, and we do see a lot of problems with people parking in those areas, and then the person could not get out of their vehicle at all to access your business. And that's another thing I think is really important to hit home, is that really this just increases people coming and using your business. I mean, we heard the statistics about how many people with disabilities are in the United States. This is just more patronage. This is just more people accessing your business, buying whatever you're selling. So it's really beneficial for the public to be accessible. It's a lot of people that you may want to come and buy whatever you're selling. The size of the space is really important, and accessible aisles. So you have to have a connection from the space to the entrance. All right, so the next thing is the person is parked, they can get into your business, but now what? They want to access whatever it is that you have inside. So this is a checklist of things to look for. Does the accessible entrance provide direct access to the main floor lobby or elevator? So that can be a big issue. They can get in, a person can get inside, but then they can't get to other parts that you're offering to other people. So you want to make sure that whatever is open to the public, that a person with a disability can access all of those points. Seats, tables, and counters, ramps, lifts, or elevators to all the public levels. So you just have to sort of think of it. If I'm coming in here, can I make sure that a person with a disability can get to all of these places inside my business? Make sure the entrance provides access to the main floor, lobby, or elevator, accessible path of travel. So you want things to be wide enough. You want space so that a person in a wheelchair or a person that's using a cane can get around without tripping or falling, or literally, if they're in a wheelchair, can actually get through the aisles, because sometimes things are too narrow and they're not even going to be able to get through, and that's going to be a big problem. Controls, so can they, if there's some sort of self-service, something that people need to use, or some kind of electrical or mechanical item that they're going to need to access, is it at a height that people can use? And the standard is operable by a closed fist. So can someone access it in that way? So just thinking about it with that lens. Seats, tables, and service counters. So you want to make sure that there's space. You want to make sure that of the height of the tables and counters. And this really means getting out a tape measure and measuring. And it may seem tedious, but it's important. It's the law. And again, it's going to increase your business if you do the right thing. So tables and seating. Bathrooms, restrooms, that's a big issue. Definitely you want people to be able to park, you want people to come inside, and you want people to be able to use the bathroom if they need to. I think we can all relate. When you have to go to the bathroom, you have to go to the bathroom. You don't necessarily want to wait till you go home. And you can't necessarily wait till you go home. So it's really important to make sure that your bathrooms are accessible. Here are some things to look for: doorways and passageways, stalls, signs, lavatories, handles, dispensers, and mirrors. Again, there are very specific inch requirements for all of these things, and it's just a matter of going in. And you may have to move some stuff around, you may have to remodel certain aspects, but this is a really critical piece. You want to make sure you have the symbol for accessibility, raised characters, color contrast in the sign, and Braille on the sign as well. Here's some information about the toilet stall. Again, you may not think of this if you're not a person with a disability who's accessing the bathroom, but once you think of it through that lens, if you go into a bathroom and there's not enough space, room to get around, it could be impossible to access the toilet. And again, that's a really critical piece, really a basic issue of human dignity, to be able to go to the bathroom. And so this is a really important piece of making sure there's space, making sure people can reach the toilet paper, the toilet, grab bars, etc. So here's some examples of inch requirements, and again, that checklist will contain all the information that you need. Additional access, telephones, drinking fountains, when those things are provided to the public, then they need to be accessible to people with disabilities also, and the ADA does have specific guidelines of what makes something like that accessible. Here's some specific information on water fountains, controls mounted on front or the side. Fountain produces no more than 4-inch into circulation space. And oftentimes the checklist will give some examples of things you can do if you cannot make the change. So in this case, provide cup dispensers for the fountains with spouts that are too high. This is that checklist that I was referencing. So for more information, you can please do look at this. It is quite lengthy, but it's actually pretty user-friendly. It looks like a checklist, and so you can go through each section of your business, look at each area and find what may need to be fixed. Some things may be kind of easy, some things may be a little more challenging, but as we've talked about, it's so important to make sure that anybody can come in and use your business. Another thing we wanted to mention, and I am not personally an expert on these tax exemptions and tax deductions, but we want to mention it because we know that that's a big deal for people. And so there are architectural tax deductions for businesses that you can put on your taxes. And so we want to mention that as something that maybe many businesses are not aware of. So for all businesses, there's an incentive to remove physical, structural, and transportation barriers, deduction of up to $15,000 a year. Example of covered expenses: providing accessible parking spaces, ramps, and curb cuts, installing wheelchair accessible telephones, water fountains, and restrooms, creating walkways at least 48 inches wide. And you can definitely find out more information about this. We just think it's really obviously showing how important it is to incentivize you to make these changes, and something that can, be great for the business if you do the right thing. This is another credit to small businesses for less than $1 million in revenue or 30 or fewer staff. So it's a credit of up to $5,000 a year, offsets the cost of modifications to comply with the ADA. So you may have been thinking, some of these changes are going to cost us money. Here's a way to offset some of those costs. So we definitely want to highlight that. We think it's really important. We think it's really great that these opportunities are provided to you, and definitely utilize them. If you do have questions, if you're in Phoenix, that's our contact at Ability 360, Daryl, who spoke earlier. If you're in Tucson, direct is the place to call, and we really hope that, that you'll reach out to us. We think it's so important for businesses to be accessible, and we know that each of you is providing something that the public wants, and we just want to make sure that everyone in the public can access it.